Hello. This is the Bible in fewer words. We are Carol and Steve Wells. This is episode 68, Numbers, chapter 31. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Carol.
Hi, Seth.
Great to be here, my friends. Thanks for the invite.
Sure. Today we have the honor to have Seth Andrews on our show. Seth is an activist, author, and speaker. He's the creator and host of the Thinking Atheist online community, podcast, and YouTube channel. Seth has published 4 books, and his prior calling was that of a Christian radio host before he deconverted. Welcome, Seth.
It's great to be here. It's interesting to be on the other side of the Bible. It's also interesting, I think, to be an atheist and to know more about the Bible now than I knew when I believed it. I don't know. I'm sure that's a common experience for a lot of people, but
I'm experiencing that. Yeah, now.
When I was a devout believer, I was like, yes, it's true. What's in it? Well, I'm not exactly sure. And then I went back and started at Genesis 1:1. It was a revelation. And I know that's part of why you do what you do as well.
Yes. Steve has been working on this for a long time. And, I kind of know little things here and there, but to really start at the beginning, like you said, and just to go through, and I just have a zillion questions. And Steve usually says, well, that's all I know about that. Which works out well. Yeah. Steve, are you ready?
Yeah, I am ready. Mm-hmm.
Great.
Okay, so this is chapter 31, the book of Numbers. Verse 1, God said to Moses, take revenge on the Midianites. Then you will die.
Okay. Why are we taking revenge on the Midianites?
That's a very good question. It seems to go back to the, remember that previous
the whoredom?
Thing? Yeah, the whoredom with the daughters of Moab.
Yeah.
Well, there's a confusion there. That's chapter 25. It was a couple episodes ago. There's a confusion between the Moabites, the daughters of Moab, and the Midianites.
So there was one Midianite woman there.
Yes.
The one who got stabbed by,
Phinehas.
Phinehas.
Yeah, she was the only one. All the others were Moabites. But it really angered God, I guess. And so he's going to take care of it now. Another thing that's strange about it, too, is that Moses, of course, married a Midianite. Yeah.
Okay. So Moses said to the people, go to war against the Midianites. This will be God's revenge on them.
I find revenge an interesting concept for God. Actually, I find anger an interesting concept. If you believe in an omnipotent, omniscient Yahweh who knew everything before the creation of everything, past, present, future, like God knew what was going to go down before anything went down, why would God ever be surprised, let alone angry? Before the beginning of space-time, he would have known that all this was going to happen. And yet we see time and again, God he sees something happen, he becomes enraged, and then he demands someone to be smote or smited, to be to smite. People must be smited. I just made a word up. Sorry about that.
That's great. I like it. I'm going to use it.
Anger really asserts that Yahweh didn't know what was going to happen. So he was surprised, and then he got really, really irritated and demanded vengeance. I find that interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am just surprised that he had Moses lead the people out of Egypt. And then, gets angry at them, wants to kill them. Moses convinces him not to. And then that just happens over and over again. Like, didn't he know that these people were going to say, hey, I'm hungry and I'm thirsty. Please give me something to eat. Like, what was his plan there?
Well, it's also like when the Israelites, they're always making mistakes. I actually narrated the audio book of Joshua Bowen called The Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament. But I was talking about how interesting it is. If you look at the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the pattern is that God's people are commanded, don't do the thing. And then they go and they disobey and they do the thing.
Yeah.
And then Yahweh gets mad and smites them. And they say, please don't smite us anymore. We promise never again to do the thing. And then 5 minutes passes and the Israelites go and do the thing. And it's just over and over this sort of fail, smite, repent, fail, smite, repent cycle that constitutes the bulk of probably the first 30% of the Bible. It's almost a comedy of sorts.
Yeah. It's pretty much the whole story of Exodus, of the Exodus anyway. Almost every chapter has them complaining about something and then God smiting them for it.
Yeah.
But before the real smiting, sending plagues, the horrific plagues.
Yeah.
Well, that might be a kind of smite. I don't know. This is a philosophical question, probably.
Yeah.
I don't know. This is the kind of stuff we talk about over coffee. Like, would a plague be a smite? I don't know.
Can't remember where we are.
Verse
now.
4, I think.
Okay. 1,000 men from each tribe will go to war. Oh, and we just had a census.
Yeah, he has 600,000 he found in the census, but they're going to send only 12,000.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting, too, that he wants all 12 tribes, the 12 tribes of Israel represented. So 1,000 soldiers from each tribe. And then, of course, the attack in verse 7, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I find it interesting that God goes after all the males, right? Men and boys. And he had an expectation that everybody, the women would be included in that, right? Just go and wipe them out. And so Moses sends everybody in knowing that even, we're talking about old women and young girls and pregnant mothers and, those who are mentally infirm. It's just the idea that they're sitting there and they must be killed, obviously executed at the end of a sword. Moses considers this the righteous act as commanded by Yahweh, who is supposedly the God of goodness. And you and I, as moral creatures, we cringe if we had heard that Allah in the Quran had commanded such a massacre. Our moral centers, those alarm bells, would be going off. In the Bible, we have been trained often to excuse, to rationalize. And I'm going to come back to that because I had some thoughts about the apologist who want to explain this story. Anyway, sorry, I took us through verse 7, I think.
Yes, actually, I'm finding that, not having read the Bible and going through these episodes, I often try to defend God, or I tell Steve, well, couldn't this have happened? Or maybe this would happen. And Steve's just going, hey, what are you doing? God can defend himself. Okay, so Steve, I think we're on 8 now.
Okay. They killed Balaam and the 5 Midianite kings and took the women and children as captives, burning their cities, and took all the possessions, animals, and slaves.
Yep, that's what we were talking about.
Yeah. and it's interesting that they killed Balaam, who really had nothing to do with anything here. He's being blamed for that thing with the Moabites, but he was called by the king of Moab, and he refused to curse Israel like the king of Moab wanted him to do. But they killed him anyway here.
And the Israelite general, actually, I guess you could call it mercy by taking the women and children. Now, of course, this is plunder, right? They're considered property. If you read the Old Testament, women are actually considered the property of a male dominant. And so, the generals say, okay, well, we're going to be merciful. And then in verse 12, they bring the women and the children and the animals, and they present them to Moses and the council. And Moses doesn't say, wow, what a wonderful thing you've done. You have demonstrated mercy amid all the blood and rage and chaos. The dust has settled, and you have done something so very human and compassionate. But that's not what Moses does.
What does Moses say?
Verse 14, Moses was angry with the officers and said to them, have you saved all the women? Essentially, he said, why did you save the women? These are women that caused the Israelites, through the counsel of Balaam, to trespass against God and bring a plague on the congregation. So the women are being blamed, as they often are. We see this from Genesis 1, or Genesis 3, rather, where the woman is blamed for tempting Adam. I just recently did a series of speeches in Florida And in Phoenix, where we were talking about the penchant throughout the Old Testament as women are blamed for tempting men or leading men astray, they're kind of the sirens who are responsible even when men make a mistake. And Moses does that very same thing here, right? The women caused the Israelites to trespass against God, and they brought a plague on the congregation. So if they are indeed being blamed for this great evil, they must be evil, and as such, they must be eradicated.
Yep.
Right?
Blame the women. But all the virgin females keep alive for yourself. So, yeah, Moses is saying, kill all those young men and the non-virgin women. How do you think they figured out who were the virgins and not the virgins, Seth?
Which is a great question. Like, how is that determined? And we're talking about puberty now, so many of these are preteen girls.
Yeah.
It's genuinely horrifying. But all the virgin females keep alive for yourselves. This is the spot where the apologists just make the wrinkles on my forehead crease together, because they like to say, well, sure. I mean, God wanted the men and the boys and the non-virgin women, they wanted them executed. But the virgin girls, no, they weren't taken as plunder. They weren't taken to pleasure the soldiers. They weren't forced into a life of servitude or to become a child bride or whatever. No. The soldiers actually liberated these young virgin girls so that they could start a new chapter and go frolic off into, I don't know, life 2.0. And I think, you're playing an incredible game of Twister if you're going to try to make that assertion. It's really frustrating to hear, because I think anyone who reads the rest of the story and the offensive execution of everybody else, you can't ignore that. But then once you get into, take them. They are now yours. They are your property. And the assertion that they are not going to be used as sex slaves or in some other demeaning way, to me, is just an insult to the text and to our intelligence.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, all those young girls starting their new lives. Great. Then we have those of you who have killed these people or touched any of their dead bodies. There's the fascination with dead bodies again. Must stay outside the camp for 7 days to purify yourselves. After 7 days, you'll be clean and can return to camp. I guess they didn't all go. All those soldiers went.
I guess the soldiers, the 12,000 soldiers, must have been around some dead bodies, right?
Yeah.
And so they were unclean, so they had to get themselves cleaned up. That seemed to be more of a concern to God, is getting them cleaned after the massacre than he wasn't concerned at all. He ordered the massacre. And
there's a weird, it's not really an echo because it came before, but in Leviticus, a woman in chapter 15, a woman who is on her period, she's commanded to leave the village or town for 7 days, and anyone who touches her will be unclean, kind of thing. So they have to be physically removed for 7 days. Instead of let's say they were in some way unclean. It seems like that would be a quick remedy, but no, a week of exile is required by Yahweh.
And, also anything they touched. So anywhere they sat down. Yeah. Wasn't that how a woman lied and said she was on her period, so she couldn't get up from the box where the little figurines were?
That's right.
were hiding.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm laughing, I think, just because of the absurdity and insanity of it, but yes.
Yeah. I laugh a lot for that reason. And usually say, jeepers. All right. So you want to take 25, Seth?
God said to Moses, take the women and animals and divide them into 2 parts, one for the soldiers, the other for the congregation, and also include a tribute to me from the soldiers' portion, one from every 500 to the humans, and animals from the congregation's half. Give one from every 50 of the humans and animals to the Levites.
What is really interesting to me is that God saved some virgins for himself.
Yeah, he gets 32 virgins, it turns out.
I don't think they're going to live very long.
Yeah, I think they were intended like the animals for sacrifice. I don't know what else he would do with them.
Yeah. Okay, so we have all those numbers going to all those different congregation or
Yeah, we could probably skip all of that because it's a tremendously large number here. We have 675,000 sheep. That's a lot of sheep
yeah, it is. Yeah. And
for them to take care of out in the desert there.
even to bring back.
And Midian's a long way away.
Yeah.
Moab is close by, but Midian is pretty far to the south. Anyway, it would have been quite the deal.
There is a concept, of course, that the earth belongs to the Lord. It's almost like tithing. Whenever people talk about bringing your 10%, you're not actually giving anything to God. You are returning to the storehouse what is God's to begin with. And so if we had read about the plunder of, almost 750,000 sheep and 72,000 cows and grabbing 32,000 virgins, etc. Let's just say let's say we gave them the concept that they were property. We'd be aghast, right? They'd sound like pirates who just thieves who'd gone in and ransacked the town. But if you look at it in the context of, well, it all belongs to God. And God can do whatever he wants. And essentially, those people who had taken it, those rebellious people, had stolen from God. So he was just simply reclaiming what was his. That's another example, I think, of apologetics rationalization for what is really an alarming act of pillaging and plundering, thievery, and just generally immoral behavior.
Yeah, I agree. And doesn't also God ask for the firstborn sons back? And if you want to keep them, you have to give a ransom,
pay a
or
ransom.
something. Yeah, I think that's the same concept. Everybody is his, everybody and everything.
So we could probably skip down and just go to the end down here where we're dealing with the gold, and they're going to get quite a bit of gold here. Moses gave the gold jewelry, which weighed 16,750 shekels, to Eleazar, the priest. And since a shekel is about 11 grams, that'd be about $12 million.
Is that how much the Mormon church was hiding?
Well, that was billions. They had billions.
Okay.
Interesting, too. The Bible spends all this time telling us about avoiding the love of money. But if you read through, and I mentioned the tabernacle, but a lot of this sort of pillaging, Yahweh has an alarming obsession with gold, with the collection of wealth in that way. I'm reminded of this verse out of Psalm 37. It says, better the little that the righteous have than the wealth of many wicked. We've heard the Bible verse about how the love of money is the root of all evil.
Yes.
And yet it seems to be monetary gain that Yahweh is very interested in, and so much so that much of what is offered up to him is not necessarily the blood of livestock, but it is physical. It is monetary offering that is given to God. And the idols, for lack of a better word, the temples, the altars that are created in his name are valued often by their construction materials, which very often include gold and the like. It's interesting. I think it's hugely hypocritical, but it is interesting.
Oh yeah, I'm thinking of the Catholic Church and their beautiful, huge structures and their gold. What are those things called?
Oh, the monstrance.
The monstrances. Yeah. And I'm just going, that is a lot of money. And there are a lot of poor people here who can't eat, and they're giving you that money. Like, that's just crazy to me.
Yeah.
Agreed.
All right. So, the last line, Moses and Eleazar brought the gold to the tabernacle as a memorial for the Israelites. Yeah. Remember this stuff. Not a good idea, but go ahead and do that.
And we tend to think about Moses, as we cap our conversation here, we tend to think about Moses in our culture as kind of that Charlton Heston version of Moses, you know, from the classic 1950s film. We only really know about the Pharaoh and the delivery from Egypt, etc. And people are not aware of, they're certainly not taught the darker shades of Moses and the nonsensical things about Moses that exist far beyond the liberation of God's chosen people from Egypt. That's a popular story, but it certainly isn't the story. And I think Bible passages like the 31st book of Numbers have great utility in helping to to paint the picture of this mythological character. Again, we have no historical evidence or proof that an actual Moses existed, but the character of Moses, I think, in order to properly understand that, you really do have to go beyond the book of Exodus into texts like Numbers 31, etc.
Yeah. When I was doing the research on this, I looked up the Wikipedia article on Numbers 31, and I saw that it referred to you and your book, Deconverted, saying that this was something that had a large effect on you when you were a Christian. I thought maybe you could talk about that a little bit for us.
Yeah, it certainly did. Being an ex-evangelical coming out of 30 years of really Bible literalist Christianity, and then, having a sea change in my life and finally listening to the voice of doubt and going back to the Bible to reread it, I was shocked by how much I had either missed or excused. And so in my autobiography, Deconverted, which released in 2011, I dedicate a whole chapter to a lot of the stuff that I discovered in the Bible that I had no idea was in the Bible, and that I really think most Christians have no idea that's in the Bible.
Yeah.
And, the story of Numbers 31 was a big part of that. And it also gets into how God really endorsed rape in the Old Testament, often would mete it out as a punishment to women, and the devaluing of the female as property of the man, and slavery, and how you could torture, beat up your slaves, and all those types of things. And so I sort of listed it, but, someone had mentioned to me, and I use this practice in my own discussions with believers, if I had read about these stories in another religious text, in another context, and I like to use Islam, if I say, well, the Islamic god Allah sent his general into battle to slaughter everyone in the town, and they rescued the women, and Allah's soldier was very angry and ordered all the women executed, but the virgin girls saved and given over to the soldiers. You watch Christians hear that story, and you see the red face of indignation come up. That's terrible. It's barbaric. I've said forever that Islam is a barbaric religion, blah, blah, blah. And then you switch it and you say, well, actually, if I'm going to be completely honest, the story I've just read to you is out of the Christian Bible. And then you give them chapter and verse, and you watch their brain tilt. Dang, 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 dang. It's Dr. John Loftus has commentary about how we can use this model to have these discussions. There's a book called The Outsider Test for Faith, which I found very, very interesting and useful out there. But this is one of the stories where I had to make a moral judgment about the story outside of the book that I thought I needed to be moral. I had to make a judgment call beyond the book that I thought I needed to make the judgment call. And I became conscious of that. And once I began to give myself permission to say, this is immoral, this makes no sense, this is cruel, it's barbaric, it's primitive, it's obviously a product of its time and of human hands. The second I liberated myself to be able to do that, it allowed me to look at so many other religious tenets and claims and dogmas and applied the same standard, and it really liberated my life.
Yeah. Were you aware of Numbers 31 when you were a Christian?
I may have read over it like I read the story of Jericho. Which is another great example. I don't want to, put the cart before the horse, but if we used to sing the song as children. Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, and the walls came a-tumbling down, and it was beautiful. He blew the trumpets, and God was victorious. But we didn't get into the nuts and bolts. We didn't get into the details where God's army went in and slaughtered everybody, and I think the animals, including the enemy. It's just horrible. It's just a bloodbath. We didn't get into that. It was more about, well, the walls fell and God was victorious. That's how we read the Old Testament. It's like we read the story of Noah's Ark. God saved 8 people. We didn't read it as, the planet drowned horribly and blah, blah, blah. We didn't look at it in those terms. It was a story about goodness, but we had really been programmed, I think, by family culture, our churches, our religious I know the whole religious culture all around us, we've been trained to pick out the good, see the silver lining, and ignore the dark cloud. But you get into Numbers 31 and stories like it, and you really spend time there. And I think you start to see the dark cloud, acknowledge it, and then decide what to do with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, as a young Catholic, my dad would say, read your Bible, but he did not want us to read our Bible. He wanted us to go to church and listen to the priest interpret that for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a way of they spoon feed whatever morsels they want, and you get on with and essentially live a secular life the rest of the week, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But many people will come to me and say, "You just don't want people to read the Bible." And I'm like, "No, in truth, I want them. Like, please read the Bible, and don't read it like a love letter. Read it like you would read any other book.
Mhm.
Start at Genesis 1:1, take the journey." And just objectively, as best you can, try to see where the journey takes you, and you just might be surprised.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's what we're trying to do, is read the Bible with people, and we'll see where it takes
Good
us.
stuff. Good stuff.
Okay. Thank you so much, Seth.
Thanks
for being with us. Bye-bye.